Well, welcome to another episode of the Grazing Sheep Podcast. I'm your host, Big Tom Perkins, along with Dr. Cameron Meyerly. And today we're joined by Dr. Andrew Weaver of North Carolina State University. You gotta put that state in there, or they just wail and gnash their teeth. It's terrible.
Let me see
Yeah,
here.
we appreciate
My
Andrew
stupid
hopping on
internet.
today. We're going to share a little bit about the National Ram Sale, which you were fortunate enough to run out to and speak at, along with had a couple of other Midwestern individuals out there talking. I know David Scales, the new NSIP director, made it out there to talk about just some of the value of that program, and figured we'd have you on. We tried to do some sales recaps of major sales. We certainly don't catch all of them, but this is one that is very production oriented, in a very different working or operational environment that we see in our part of the country, Tom. And it's one of those items that really fascinates me especially from a terminal sire use standpoint and a traditional market endpoint on what the selection criteria looks like and what those animals are being asked to go out and do. So just tell us a little bit on what you had to present about in the event in and of itself.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again, and certainly enjoyed getting to go to the National Ram Sale this year. For the last few years, I've seen pictures and stories, and last year after the sale, I just told myself I'm going. Whether it's for work or personal purposes, I'm going. Because I wanted to see it and be able to meet about a production system very different than what I'm used to here in the East. So very thankful, fortunate to be able to go, and a really fun experience. So got to work with some FFA members from local FFA group, as well as some students in the Sheep and Goat Club at Utah State University. They came down on Friday evening before the U sale. We got to talk to them and do some hands-on demonstrations related to data collection and the importance of data collection and what we can use that information for in terms of selection decisions and marketing decisions. And we ran some sheep across the scale. We had them guess what some rams weighed, and then we ran them across the scale to see what they actually weighed. And I think the average difference between the estimated weights and the actual weights was about 20 pounds. So that point was well proven. And then Lisa, Serber was there, and she had her ultrasound machine and did some carcass ultrasound and demonstrated that for the kids, and did some micron testing as well. So kind of got to cover the growth traits and weight, which obviously plays a big part in marketing for many of us. But then also got to talk about some of those more unique traits, the carcass traits, and then the wool traits, which certainly for the folks out west, they pay a lot more attention to. So it was a really fun activity. I was really encouraged because those kids were engaged. They asked, after my students, if the majority of my students were like these every single day, man, would teaching be fun. But really encouraging that hopefully these kids will continue on and stay involved in the industry and sustain that passion through the rest of their education and their career. So yeah, it was a great experience, and certainly encourage anyone that has the opportunity to go out there to make the trip out to Heber City.
Yeah, do you think it's you'd mentioned young people and willing to be involved, and I think maybe it's because I have turned the corner into my later years of life this year, passing the big 3-0 mark and turning into a little bit of a curmudgeon. But I'm wondering, we've seen some cultural differences in young people, what I would say, just how they approach farm labor or agriculture as a whole. Not everybody, but you look at them, and again, it's one of those. I don't know if it's me just getting old. It's like, oh, back in my day, I would have hopped right in there and done this, and that. But I'm curious from a, a region standpoint, is there a stronger, you'd mentioned, students that you're teaching versus maybe FFA kids clear across the other side of the country. Is there a difference, you think, in culture and maybe just the size of operations we're seeing out there? Or is it just random?
Yeah, that might be some of it. I mean, I think what I thought one of the really cool things is maybe I thought it was cool just solely because it's not the standard kind of landscape and culture that I'm used to. It that part of Utah, rapid urban development, but at the same time, what's not multi-million-dollar retirement homes are ranches, rodeos, stock horses, cows, and sheep. And we were driving through kind of the main road that runs through the BYU campus there in Provo, and we pulled up next to a stock trailer, and I noticed there was wool sticking out of the side of the trailer, and realized it was full of lambs. And I thought to myself, driving around North Carolina, I see a lot of semi trailers full of pigs, and I see pink skin sticking through there. I don't know if I've ever pulled up next to a trailer in North Carolina with wool sticking out of it. So I think it just is part of the culture out there, and they grow up around it. And especially the kids coming from those families that have lived there for generations and have branched out there. They're probably much more accustomed to that and that way of life than a lot of the students we get in the East that come from more urban backgrounds.
Yeah, and I think too what the long-term goals are of those individuals certainly plays a part in just being eager to get involved with large animals. We know the distribution of pre-vet students or those that end up in vet school, pretty low percentage on the large animal side of things, and you run a pretty quick cost analysis on all that and can't really fault them on that side. I do appreciate the students that are in that vet school taking on that debt, that have a passion on the large animal side of things, because it is driven by passion, and it's something that a lot of us can then relate to. But when we think of that sale, just as a whole, what's the demographic of consigner, demographic of buyer? This is something where we're at in the country, even center of the nation sale, the buying crowd is very different. You look at the sheep that are consigned, and I only bring that up because we've talked about that center of the nation sale before. Sheep that are consigned have a multitude of uses and can fit a number of production situations. So when you're clear out in a corner of the world that really has one primary production model, and yes, there's variation within a lot of those, but kind of what are buyers and consigners looking for in that sale?
Yeah, great question. I think it's in terms of the demographics of sheep there, really on the white face side, it was Rambouillets, Targies, and some Columbias. There was a group of Merinos there that sold extremely well. I'm not very familiar with the Merino world, but what I learned or what I was told is that this flock, they used to have their own production sale, and they've stopped hosting that, and instead have started bringing their rams to the National Ram Sale, and some of the best Merinos in the country. Lots of data behind those sheep, and they sold extremely well. So there were a few polypays, and maybe I was probably the most shocking thing to me is the polypays were not very well accepted out there. When for someone that's from originally, and still sort of in tune with the polypay deal, some pretty nice polypays. And so I probably should have jumped on the opportunity to maybe buy those rams and find a use for them for what they sold for. But yeah, that was a little surprising to me. And there were only a handful of those. But primarily Rambouillets, Targies, and then on the blackface side, mostly Suffolk rams, a few Hampshires, and then some crossbreds as well. And so not maybe the breed diversity that we see at like this NSIP Center of the Nation sale, breeds that kind of historically have been used out there quite a bit, and a mix of, you know, a lot of the white face rams are from western flocks, a few from the east, and then a lot of the black face rams, you know, originating in the Midwest, upper Midwest, and going out there, kind of that traditional terminal sire that's raised further east and then utilized as in those terminal matings in those western range flocks. So yeah, a lot, you know, buyers, commercial sheep producers, that you know, in terms of scale, very different than, again, we're within the east. You know, we're talking thousands of ewes, and they're trying to put together loads of rams that are way larger than what many of us in the east are used to turning out for a given breeding season. They seem to like the yearlings. I think just in terms of their size and durability, and you know, they're going to turn them out, and they've got to live on not much and breed ewes at the same time. So yeah, it was very different. You walk in the barn and yeah, they were all stalled in horse stalls, and you peek in the pen and there's a big old Rambouillet ewe with a ram with a big set of horns on it, and that's, you know, for someone from the east that's used to working with Katahdins, that is not the ram that you are used to looking at when you show up to a sale. So
right,
it was pretty neat.
Yeah, and on the you talked scale of operation. When we think of scale of sheep and just frame size of those sheep, is part of the horse stall situation well, we have these facilities, or is it these are not human tamed sheep and we know we can keep them in this horse stall? I guess if you wouldn't mind, like if you could guess, or maybe you actually ran some over the scale, average weight on some of these whiteface range type rams.
Yeah. So that was like, I mean, I peeked in that pen. I was like, wow, these things are gigantic. And you know, again, my kind of breeding philosophy in many cases is, you know, I prefer a very moderate frame whiteface ewe, or a hair ewe, crossed on whatever terminal sire is needed to make acceptable market lambs. And so to me, to see these white rams that were, you know, 200 to 260 pounds probably, was a little bit shocking. I was, you know, I asked the question to several folks, you know, why in the world are these things so big? And the answer I got was, and this is something, again, that not used to working with here in the East. Their grazing contracts for summer range are based on a per head basis. And so whether you're running a 150 pound or 175 pound ewe, it's going to cost you the same amount. So their philosophy is a bigger ewe is going to have more growth genetics, and hopefully raise a larger, you know, heavier litter. And so if they're going to pay the same amount for a sheep to be out there, they'd rather have a little bit bigger one that hopefully can bring a heavier lamb home. And so that was the logic that I heard. But it was a little bit surprising to me to see maternal sires that were frame size wise, maybe not a lot different than some of the Suffolk sires that were there. And so that was interesting. And definitely, that was kind of, I guess, one of the surprises that I had shown up there. The horse stalls were not for containment. It just happens to be at that event center. The only place to stall animals are in horse stalls. And so there's actually some discussion. You know, they would really like to have those rams in more open pens like you would see in Spencer, because it's a lot easier to see the rams.
Oh yeah.
But it just, that facility doesn't have those available. And so, or they got to use horse stalls. So it is not to contain the sheep.
Yeah, I was curious. I know been to sales and seen sheep get spooked and they jump over a gate, and in some instances have actually even seen injury caused to that. And there's nothing worse than, well, if it gets hurt on the way to the sale ring, that's bad. I suppose if it gets hurt on the way back, it's even worse, because you go, well, whose responsibility is this now to take care of it? But yeah, super fascinating. Just the differences in production model and like you said, that there's a reason behind. I'm not going to call it madness, but the thought process that's going into why sheep are being selected in a fashion they're being selected for, and identifying those sheep that have superior genetics. Is that in all NSIP sale, or do they have industry rams that sell theirs as well without EBVs? And if so, kind of what do you see on buying trends of just preference from those range operators?
Yeah, so it's a mix of both, and I don't have a number, exact percentage on NSIP as a portion of the total offering. I would say it was a little bit dependent maybe on breed or breed type. Um, a number of the terminal sires were enrolled in NSIP, the white face sheep, some were, some weren't. And it in terms of I didn't do an average by NSIP status. I think a lot of it. I think some of the there's some buyers that really believe in NSIP and are willing to buy and maybe pay a premium for rams with that additional information. I think name and reputation also still play a large part. And it seemed like there were some operations that sold really well. And I've certainly have been raising very high quality stock that I've worked for many years and are being rewarded for that. And so I that's a great question. I should probably sit down and figure out what that difference is. We certainly see like the Glade Spring Ram sale. We see a very stark difference between the NSIP and non-NSIP sires in terms of average sale price. And I wouldn't say the spread is as significant out there at this point.
Yeah, it's kind of nice. We've seen data collected and research projects out there with the Leading Edge project on utilizing that data. Whereas in a lot of situations, it's oh, trust me, this is going to work, and how it's going to work, and certainly a lot of the work that you've done on the validation of the fecal egg count EBV and some of those items gives us some faith going in behind that numeric selection. But yeah, I really appreciate the update out there. I think it's, again, kind of an eye-opening experience to walk into a place and not really have any type of preconceived notion on, well, we do it this way in North Carolina, so I think you guys need to change things up. But just going out and learning and evaluating some future opportunities that exist for the sheep industry in that part of the country, I think is very beneficial long term. From an educational standpoint of things, I know you touched on the kind of youth programming and the ultrasounding. How many of those animals are being selected with data that's being collected out there on the ultrasounding side of things? Or was that just a hands-on demo of, hey, we've got sheep, we've got someone with an ultrasound? What's the value of that tool?
Yeah, I think it's some producers are using it pretty heavily, and some aren't. The trouble is still in many ways, and not actually return its investment in terms of like direct carcass premiums. It's some of the pricing schemes and how they market lambs out there, again, is very different than the East. And so we know, I don't have an exact number, I should say, in terms of like if you scan your sheep and select for muscle depth, this is the additional premium that's potentially to be had. I think where it probably has the most value is maybe in terms of fat thickness. Lambs in general in that part of the world are too fat at harvest. We talk about excessive fat and waste there, and being able to select genetics that are trimmer and are going to be have a more favorable yield grade at harvest. is going to be something that this could certainly be beneficial, maybe more. And so there are some folks using it, others aren't. Again, I think a lot of the terminal sire breeders are. There were a few white sheep that had scan patches on their back where you could tell that they were ultrasounded. But again, then you come back to the question of, why are we ultrasounding a white-faced maternal sheep when their goal should be to raise a healthy set of lambs and milk well? We should be bringing carcass attributes in on the top side of the pedigree. To me, it makes a lot of sense to scan the terminal sires. And if I was raising a bunch of white sheep and marketing maternal sires, I would probably not spend the money on the ultrasound because I knew I could get that through those carcass traits through crossbreeding.
Right. Yeah.
So
I think that's a great point on the terminal side of things. And just because you can collect data doesn't mean you necessarily should. You touched on a point there on lambs in that part of the country. Maybe, we speak on waste and getting those a little over finished. Is that a function of breed, in your opinion, or is that days on feed, management in the feed lot before those end up going to slaughter, or individuals holding on to that product, the live animal product, longer than what they should be and not sending it at the appropriate weight and level of finish?
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with feed yard management, timing of harvest, availability. When are we? How are we determining which lambs go to market, when they go to market? And I'm not going to cast any blame on a particular segment of the industry, but I do think maybe I think implementation of terminal sires and crossbreeding maybe could be further implemented as a genetic tool to improve trimness on those market lambs. And then I think we really need to look at how are we identifying and selecting those lambs at a particular time to make sure we're not over finishing them and leaving them in the feed yard for too long and allowing them to get too fat. I think some of the results of the Leading Edge project, there was a group of lambs that could have gone to harvest straight off the mountain. They never needed to go to the feed yard, and yet they were put on the truck and sent to the feed yard. And 30 to 60 days of feed were put into them before they got harvested, which was really just a waste. So how do we, is there a way that we could sort off lambs and identify maybe a group coming off the mountain that could go straight to harvest at a more efficient endpoint? And then when they get to the feed yard, how are we monitoring fat deposition, level of finish, and timing on moving those animals out? Is it just visual appraisal in terms of finish, and they're getting sorted off? Are we actually taking weights and basing weights, sale marketing time points on weight, which I think is certainly better than visual appraisal, but at the same time, when you have a different breed composition, their finishing weights could vary quite a bit. I mean, a pure white sheep versus a crossbred speckle, is going to have the same numerical yield grade at very different weights. And so I think we need to think about that and really understand as an industry, and look into how are we optimizing our management to send lambs to harvest at the most efficient time point possible, so they're not sitting in the feed yard eating feed and putting on fat that's just going to be trimmed off later on. So I think it's a management and genetic thing. And I don't live in the West, and I'm not super involved in that side of the industry. So I have my thoughts and can share my feelings on it, but certainly the folks out there, that are involved in that on a day-to-day basis, certainly know more than I do on that segment of the industry and how they sell sheep out there.
Yeah, well, really good conversation on just kind of what it looked like and some differences in production model for sure. So I think that's an awesome trip and little bit of distance there. The other thing we were going to chat
it is,
about
but
today,
the nice thing is, Oh, I was just going to mention, and I'll put in a plug for the National Ram Sale. I mean, it really, it's on the other side of the country for most of us, but at the same time, Salt Lake's a pretty easy city to fly into, and Heber City, where the sale is located, is only about 45 minutes from Salt Lake. Super easy drive, pretty much 4-lane interstate the entire way, so really easy to get to. So if you have the ability to get the plane ticket bought and go out there, I certainly recommend it. I think it in a lot of ways it was like Spencer in terms of like networking and bringing a lot of people together from all over the country. I mean, I was there from North Carolina, folks from Michigan, Minnesota, South Dakota, North Dakota, all the way west. Washington State was represented, and so you have folks from all over the country that are all in one place for a weekend. And so from a networking standpoint, from kind of an industry community standpoint, highly recommend it. Also, it's probably worth the trip solely to eat the lamb chops that are cooked for dinner on Friday night and lunch on Saturday before the sale. I don't think I have had lamb as good as that. It's fair to I haven't. The Maniotis family out of Colorado, they catered lunch, and I don't know what the secret is. I was told that the spice recipe has been perfected for many years. I don't know how it's cooked. Whatever they do, they have got it figured out. And if you could cook lamb like that and serve it, consumption in this country would quadruple. That was the best lamb I've had in my life. It was incredible.
Nice. Well, that's awesome. Again, I appreciate you sharing kind of backstory and just your experiences. We did want to talk a little bit. We've kind of been following the NC State crew on their journey with cover crops all seasons throughout the year. And to this point, honestly, kind of just living vicariously through Andrew and what they're doing down there without access to rain. I had some lofty goals in 24 for some rejuvenation of pastures and reseeding and trying some different cover crop items to increase days of grazing. And unfortunately, as we've talked on here before, and should not come as a surprise to anybody, without rain, it's kind of hard to grow new seedlings, let alone or existing grass, let alone new seedlings. So tell us a little bit about what you have going on down there with you had the fall cover crop and had some rain, maybe not production to the level that you were hoping, and now that that's been terminated, going back in and looking at a fall/winter mix and what that looks like for you guys in that part of the country.
Yeah, so I think in a previous episode we shared kind of like the first half of the summer and our experiences with with planting a summer annual and then it not raining for the entire month of June, and then just the skies let loose in July and rain like crazy, and we grew a pile of grass, and then we got to graze it in August. We ran the entire flock. We had the entire farm, every animal that we could. We put it in one giant flock. And grazed through about 132 head grazed on 5 acres. We did split it up, which is not necessarily the easiest thing to do in sorghum. We ran the side by side through it to knock paths down, or we could put up poly wire, and ran them behind poly wire. And so there were 3 or 4. It was a 5-acre field split in 3 or 4 sections. We ran 132 head through there, and I think they last about 17 days on 32 acres. And so not too bad. Got off of it. It didn't rain in the month of August. And then in September, the skies once again let loose. So we're kind of on this every other month thing. So didn't rain in August, and we got quite a bit of regrowth. We planted that raised crazy mix. We had a pretty diverse mix there established that we were able to graze in August. And then the pop, what regrew was much less diverse. Really just consisted of sorghum and a little bit of pearl mill. But it's still a really nice stand that we were able to regraze there about the third week of September. So we I guess it was about 28 days of rest. We were able to go back in and graze for 2 more weeks. We didn't have as many head on the second go around. It was our breeding season, so we did have breeding groups split up, and we didn't want to run rams and breeding groups next to one another. So we were a bit restricted in terms of how many animals we could turn out. We were able to we didn't have any cows at the farm this summer, but we were able to bring over 5 mature Herefords for a couple weeks from the beef unit and let them graze. We were up kind of against the deadline because we needed to get our cool season annual mix planted. I didn't want to wait too long to do that. So really we needed to get that second graze taken off as quick as possible there in late September, so that there in early October we could go ahead and plant. So we grazed through everything, let them eat what they could, ran the bush hog through it afterwards, knocked it down real close, and then we just went in and drilled our cool season mix right into the residue. So we figured, we're late enough in the year. There's not a ton of warm days left. You take sorghum and knock it down to 4 inches, and the chance of it really regrowing is pretty slim, especially this time of year. So we did not burn it down. We went in and planted our cool season mix without any herbicide, no fertilizer, just went in and put it in the ground. For the month of October, it once again hasn't rained again. So we're on a pretty good streak here of it, no rain in June, August, and October. And so all we can hope for is that November is rainy, which if the trend is true, we should get a bunch of rain in November. And so it's in the seed is in the ground. And we'll see what happens. We did that planted that right before the state fair, and then I've been away for a week and a half here, and I have not looked at it. So we'll see. I don't really expect to see much because it hasn't rained. So I was kind of surprised, just in terms of what the soil moisture digging down in there a little bit was still pretty good despite not having any rain for a while here. I think using that no-till drill and not disturbing, minimizing soil disturbance, laying down a bunch of residue on top and kind of protecting that surface. I don't have data to show it, but observationally, I think that might be making a difference and working to our benefit in terms of maintaining a little bit of soil moisture and hopefully helping us get something established here this fall, even with the drought.
Yeah, and definitely on the germination side of things, I would like to keep as much of that moisture in there as possible. But and you may have already said this, but on the Raised Crazy mix that you guys utilize, the fall mix, what all goes into that, and kind of what, I guess, are you most excited for in that mix?
Yeah, and I know Tom has used this in the past, and there's a bunch of things in here. So if I forget one, Tom, please chime in. So it is ryegrass, triticale, spring oats, hairy vetch, crimson clover, 2 types of brassicas. Am I missing any, Tom?
There should be cereal rye in that as well.
Yes.
Yeah,
It's kind of a cool mix because there's some plants that come on early and quick and you can graze in the fall, and then there's some other species that come on later and allow for some spring grazing. So this is the first year we've ever used it, but I know, Tom, you've used it some. I've heard lots of good things. I've actually heard people like the fall mix more than the summer mix in some cases. So I'm excited to try it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. You won't see the crimson clover in the fall. You won't see the hairy vetch in the fall, and you'll just see a little bit of the cereal rye in the fall. But all that comes on really strong in the spring. So I was real happy with it. And I just like the fact that you've got the oats and those brassicas that you can graze in the and that rye grass that you can graze in the fall. So it really does kind of split things up, and you get 2 different grazings out of it. But I've got
Yeah.
pictures of that mix. It's every bit shoulder high by the time we went into it in the spring. We were late. We should have been in earlier, but it was insane.
Oh man. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. We've used kind of a monoculture or a simple mix the last couple of years, and we really haven't gotten much fall growth at all. And you're sitting on your hands grazing stockpile fescue and waiting for the spring to come around to get any growth to graze. And so, we might still be sitting on our hands with the weather that we're having, but we'll see if weather stays moderate temperatures and we can get a little bit of moisture here. Maybe we'll get something that comes up here still this fall.
Well, that'll be good, Andrew. I hope you guys get some rain. We want to thank you for coming on again, giving us an update there on that sale and what you guys are doing there with cover crops. That's always interesting. We'll have to have you back on here after you get some rain and see how that does for you in the fall. Then probably get you back on in the spring, see how that did. Wow. But so we thank you for listening to another episode of the Grazing Sheep Podcast. There's a Facebook page, there's a YouTube channel. Go on there and like and follow and all that fun stuff. If you got any questions, comments, you can reach out to me at bigtomperkins@gmail.com. And so we just want to thank you again, Andrew, for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
I'll enjoy it.
So we'll catch up with I'll at least catch up with Cam next week.
Sounds good, Tom.
All right. Bye.